Earth had been watching the stars for a long time, not with telescopes alone, but with quiet ears and careful minds. For over 100 years, since the first alien signal crackled through deep space receivers in the early 22nd century, humanity had known it was not alone. At first there was panic, then wonder, then fear, and finally silence. Not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of choice. The Galactic Council, a union of dozens of spacefaring civilizations, had long since catalogued Earth as Sol 3, a Class M planet with intelligent life but no warp capability. To them, that meant one thing: not ready. Not worthy, not worth the trouble. They allowed limited observation. Small drones disguised as asteroids drifted near the moon, scanning cities, forests, oceans, but no contact. No invitation. No voice. Inside the council chambers, orbiting the gas giant Xylos Prime, Earth was often the subject of jokes. Another mud ball with oxygen breathers, one delegate would say. They still burn fossil fuels in some regions. Another would chuckle, though that hadn't been true for 80 years. The worst offender was Kalar, a tall, scaled envoy from the Virex Dominion. He spoke with a voice like grinding stone and a smile like a knife. He called humans gravity addicts because they had never left their cradle in large numbers. He said their art was noise, their history a cycle of violence, and their future irrelevant. These remarks were not secret. The Council's public sessions were broadcast across known space. Earth's scientists, diplomats, and citizens listened. They heard every sneer, every chuckle, every dismissal, but they did not respond. Not because they were weak, but because they were waiting. After the great collapse of the late 21st century, when rising seas swallowed coastlines, wars flared over water and food, and nations nearly tore each other apart, humanity had made a choice. They chose unity. Slowly, painfully, they built the Global Accord, a framework that put survival above sovereignty. Borders still existed on maps, but resources, knowledge, and defense were shared. Cities were rebuilt with green cores and clean energy. Oceans were cleaned by fleets of autonomous skimmers. Forests grew where deserts once spread. Technology advanced, but quietly. No flashy starships, no weapons aimed at the sky. Earth focused inward, healing itself while the galaxy looked away. Yet in hidden labs beneath the Andes, inside shielded domes in Antarctica, and on orbital platforms disguised as solar farms, work continued. Not on war, but on understanding. They studied every scrap of alien data they could gather, leaked signals, discarded transmissions, even the faint heat signatures of passing ships. From these fragments, they learned. They learned how warp fields bent space, how alien AIs thought in patterns humans couldn't see, how the Council's so-called peace was really a fragile balance of power, held together by old treaties and mutual fear. And they learned that the galaxy was not as wise as it claimed to be. Many species still fought, many still lied, many still saw weaker worlds as tools or toys. On Earth, people lived ordinary lives. Kids went to school. Farmers grew food in vertical towers. Artists painted murals on recycled walls. But everyone knew the truth. They were being watched, judged, mocked, and still they stayed silent. In Chicago, Luis Garcia worked as a quantum systems engineer. His daughter Rosa was 8 years old and loved stargazing. One night, as they sat on their rooftop garden, she pointed to a bright dot moving slowly across the sky. "Is that one of them?" she asked. Luis nodded. "Probably a Virex scout. They pass by every few weeks. Do they know we see them?" "They think we don't understand what they are." Rosa frowned. "That's dumb." "We're not dumb." "No," Luis said softly. "We're not." In Nairobi, Maya Patel trained as a pilot for the newly formed Orbital Response Unit, a group so secret even most government officials didn't know its full purpose. Her simulator was housed in a bunker beneath Mount Kenya. Every day she practiced docking with invisible targets, evading sensor sweeps, and flying through gravitational anomalies. She never asked why. She just knew it mattered. In Geneva, President Daniel Ford reviewed weekly reports from the Earth Listening Initiative. The latest transcript showed Kalar calling humans sentimental apes who cry over dead trees. Ford didn't react. He filed it away with the others. But his eyes lingered on the words longer than usual. The breaking point hadn't come yet. But it was coming. The galaxy assumed Earth was passive because it did not shout. They mistook patience for weakness, silence for ignorance. They did not know that humanity had spent a century listening, not just to their words, but to their patterns, their lies, their fears. They did not know that Earth's silence was not empty. It was full of plans. And they certainly did not know about Project Aegis. Hidden in plain sight, the project had been building for decades. Not a weapon, not an invasion fleet, but a presence. A way to step onto the galactic stage not as beggars, but as equals. The first true Earth-built starship was nearly ready. Its name was the Odyssey. It ran on quantum fold drives pieced together from reverse-engineered alien tech and human ingenuity. Its hull was woven with self-healing alloys. Its crew, hand-picked from every continent, had trained in secrecy for years. But none of that mattered yet. Because Earth still had not spoken. Kalar's latest speech had aired 3 days ago. This time, he suggested that Earth's atmosphere be harvested to stabilize dying colonies in the Helion hegemony. Why let oxygen go to waste on creatures who wasted on poetry and protests? He had said, to laughter from several delegates. The broadcast played in schools, in hospitals, in homes. People watched. They felt the sting, but they did not riot. They did not scream into the void. They gathered in quiet groups. They shared messages. They waited for the signal. President Ford called an emergency session of the Unified Earth Council. For the first time in history, every nation's representative stood in the same room. Physically, not virtually. No screens, no delays. Just voices, faces, and a single question. Is it time? The vote was unanimous. Not for war, not for revenge, but for voice Earth would finally answer. But that was for tomorrow. Tonight, the planet was still silent. The stars above burned cold and distant. Somewhere out there, the council debated whether to classify Earth as a nuisance or a nuisance to be removed. They did not know that the mud dwellers had built wings. They did not know that the gravity addicts had learned to fly. And they did not know that silence, when broken, can shake the stars. The insult that finally broke Earth's silence did not come with explosions or invasions. It came in words, spoken calmly in a chamber of polished stone and floating light. Delegate Zintra of the Helion hegemony stood before the Galactic Council during the Centauri Concord Summit. Her voice smooth as glass, her eyes sharp as blades. She was not shouting. She did not need to. Her words carried weight because the galaxy listened. Sol 3, she began, has long been a puzzle, a world teeming with life yet trapped in its own past. Its people cling to oceans they cannot manage, forests they once burned and histories soaked in blood. They speak of peace now, but their records show otherwise. She paused, letting the silence hang. Then she smiled. Recent analysis suggests Earth's biosphere is unstable. Its oceans hold vast reserves of deuterium and rare salts, resources we could use to heal dying worlds in our outer colonies. Why let such wealth sit unused beneath the feet of sentimental creatures who still name their storms and cry over extinct birds? A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some delegates nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. Kalar, seated nearby, gave a low chuckle. Zintra continued. I propose we reclassify Sol 3 not as a developing civilization, but as a biological hazard zone. Not out of cruelty, but responsibility. We would relocate its population to controlled habitats, preserve what is useful, and repurpose the rest for the greater galactic good. The broadcast of her speech reached Earth within minutes. It played on every public screen, every personal device, every school and station. In Chicago, Luis Garcia was helping Rosa with her homework when the alert chimed. He tapped the wall panel, and Zintra's face filled the room. Rosa watched wide-eyed as the alien woman spoke of moving humans like livestock and harvesting their seas like crops. Dad, Rosa whispered. Are they going to take our ocean? Luis didn't answer right away. His hands were clenched, but his voice stayed calm. No, he said. Not if we say no. In Nairobi, Maya Patel was running a night simulation when the alert flashed red across her visor. She paused the drill, pulled off her helmet, and watched the replay 3 times. Each time her jaw tightened. She thought of the coral reefs her grandmother used to dive in, now restored, now thriving. She thought of the children who swam in Lake Victoria, laughing under clean skies, and she thought of Zintra's cold smile. She walked out of the bunker without permission, climbed to the surface, and stared up at the stars. For the first time, she didn't see wonder. She saw threat. In Geneva, President Daniel Ford sat alone in the council chamber of the Unified Earth Government. The room was dark except for the soft glow of the central table, where Zintra's words still echoed from the playback. He had heard every insult before, but this was different. This wasn't mockery. This was a plan. A legal polished council-approved plan to strip Earth bare. He pressed a button. Within an hour, every national representative was en route to Geneva, by suborbital shuttle, by maglev train, by silent electric aircraft. No delays, no excuses. The message was clear. This was not a discussion. This was a decision. By dawn, they were all there. Men and women from every continent, every culture, every language. They did not argue. They did not debate. They simply looked at each other and knew. The time for silence was over. Ford stood at the head of the table. "They think we are too soft to fight," he said. "Too divided to act. Too quiet to matter. But we have listened long enough. Today we answer." A vote was called. Not by show of hands, but by standing. One by one, every delegate rose. No one remained seated. It was the first unanimous emergency resolution in Earth's unified history. The order went out immediately. Activate Project Aegis, launch the Odyssey. Prepare the crew. Earth would send a delegation, not to beg, not to plead, but to stand. In hidden shipyards beneath the Pacific crust, massive doors slid open. The Odyssey, a vessel no larger than a city block but built with every ounce of human knowledge, hummed to life. Its quantum-fold core pulsed with steady blue light. Its outer shell shimmered, adjusting to ambient radiation. Inside, Captain Elena Ruiz ran final checks. She was 42, born in Bogotá, raised in Houston, trained in orbital mechanics and xenolinguistics. She had waited her whole life for this moment. Ben Carter, Earth's lead diplomat, reviewed his speech one last time. He was from Portland, Oregon, and had spent 20 years studying alien cultures through leaked data streams. He knew their customs, their taboos, their hidden fears. He would not shout. He would not threaten. He would simply speak the truth and let it burn. Back in Chicago, Rosa asked her father, "Are we going to fight them?" Luis knelt beside her. "Not with guns," he said. "With truth. With presence. With the fact that we are here and we are not going anywhere." In Nairobi, Maya suited up. She wasn't on the Odyssey, her role was Earthside, but she would be ready if needed. She touched the patch on her sleeve, a blue circle with a single white dot. Earth. Home. Across the planet, people gathered in parks, in plazas, in quiet homes. They did not riot. They did not panic. They stood together, eyes on the sky, heart steady. For the first time in over a century, Earth was not just listening. It was preparing to speak, and what it would say would change everything. The Odyssey lifted off 3 days later, not with fire and thunder, but with a whisper of displaced air. No fanfare, no broadcast. Just a ship, a crew, and a message. We are coming. As it pierced the upper atmosphere, Captain Ruiz looked back at the blue marble below. She thought of all the generations who had suffered, rebuilt, dreamed, and waited. She thought of Rosa, of Maya, of every child who had ever looked up and wondered if anyone out there saw them. Now, they would see. Because Earth had stayed silent long enough, and silence, once broken, cannot be unbroken. The Odyssey moved through space like a thought, quiet, precise and impossible to ignore once noticed. It had left Earth's orbit without ceremony, its quantum-fold drive bending space in gentle ripples rather than violent bursts. No trail of fire, no loud announcement. Just a ship alone heading toward the heart of the galaxy. Inside, the crew worked in calm focus. Captain Elena Ruiz sat in the command chair, her eyes on the star map glowing before her. Beside her, Ben Carter reviewed his notes one last time. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. They all were. For years, they had trained in silence, knowing this day might come. Now it had. 3 weeks after launch, the Odyssey reached the outer edge of the Xylo system. The Galactic Council's spire, a towering structure of silver alloy and living crystal, orbited the gas giant like a crown. Ships of all shapes and sizes drifted around it, sleek Helian cruisers, bulky Virex freighters, delicate bioships from the Mycelian Concord. None of them expected a human vessel. When the Odyssey appeared on long-range sensors, the Council's traffic control sent a standard hail. "Unidentified craft, state your origin and purpose." Elena didn't answer with words. She transmitted Earth's official signal, a simple sequence of prime numbers followed by the sound of ocean waves and a child's voice saying, "Hello," in 50 languages. Then she added one line, "Earth requests audience." The reply came 10 minutes later, laced with disbelief. Sol 3 is not authorized for council approach. Return to your system. Elena ignored the order. She guided the Odyssey closer, matching the spire's orbital path with smooth, confident movements. The ship's systems adjusted automatically to the spire's complex gravity field, a feat most new species struggled with for weeks. The Odyssey did it on the first try. Alarms rang inside the council chamber. Delegates turned toward the viewing ports. Some laughed. Look, the mud dwellers built a toy, Kalar sneered, leaning back in his seat. Zintra frowned, her fingers tapping the arm of her chair. But the laughter died when the Odyssey docked. Not at the visitors' bay for unregistered species where ships were scanned, stripped of weapons and held for days, but at the primary diplomatic ring, reserved for full members. The ship aligned perfectly with the docking clamps without a single correction. The magnetic seals engaged with a soft hum. Security teams rushed to the port, weapons ready. But when the airlock opened, only 2 humans stepped out. Ben Carter in a simple gray suit and Elena Ruiz in her captain's uniform, both unarmed, both calm. A Virex guard blocked their path. You are not permitted here. Ben looked at him, not with anger, but with quiet certainty. We were not invited, but we are here, and the council will listen, his voice carried. Not loud but clear. It echoed through the corridor, picked up by hidden mics relayed to every chamber in the spire. Within minutes, the news spread. Earth had arrived. The council called an emergency session. Delegates hurried to their seats, some annoyed, some curious, a few afraid. Kalar stormed in, his scales flared in irritation. Zintra entered last, her expression unreadable. Ben and Elena were led to the central dais, the same spot where Zintra had spoken of harvesting Earth's oceans. Now Ben stood there facing the assembled galaxy. He did not bow. He did not smile. He simply began. For 112 years, he said, you have spoken about us as if we were not listening. You called us primitive. You called us violent. You called us irrelevant. And we said nothing. He paused. The chamber was silent. We stayed silent not because we agreed, but because we were learning. While you mocked our art, we studied your science. While you laughed at our history, we mapped your lies. While you planned to take our world, we built a way to stand before you. A murmur rose. Some delegates shifted. Others leaned forward. We are not here to fight, Ben continued. We are here to remind you that Earth is not a resource. It is a home. And its people are not animals to be relocated. They are humans, flawed, yes, but capable of change. Capable of peace. Capable of more than you ever gave us credit for. Elena stepped forward then. She carried no weapon, but her presence was strong. You think silence means weakness, she said. But silence can also mean patience. And patience can build things you cannot imagine. She gestured toward the viewing port. Outside, the Odyssey hung in space, small but unbroken. That ship was built with no help from you. No stolen tech. No begging. Just human minds, human hands, and 100 years of watching you make the same mistakes we once did. Kalar stood abruptly. This is a stunt, he barked. A primitive show of defiance. You have no power here. Elena turned to him. Power isn't just weapons or warp drives. It's truth. And we have that. Then Ben played the first recording. It was Kalar's voice from a private channel thought secure. Let them drown in their own oceans, he said in the clip. They'll be easier to manage once they've lost everything. Gasps filled the chamber. Kalar's face darkened. Before he could speak, another clip played. Zintra speaking to a Helian admiral. Once the council votes to reclassify Sol 3, we move fast. Drain the Pacific first. The humans won't even know what's happening until their coastlines vanish. Zintra shot to her feet. That's fabricated. Ben shook his head. It's not. And there's more. Much more. He didn't play at all. Just enough. Enough to show that Earth had been listening. Not just to public speeches, but to secrets. Enough to show they were not blind. Not helpless. Not fools. The chamber fell into a silence deeper than any Earth had ever known. Delegates looked at each other, at the humans on the dais, at their own hands. Some felt shame. Others felt fear. A few felt respect. The mycelian delegate, a soft-spoken being of woven light, rose slowly. You came not to threaten, she said, but to reveal. That is honorable. Ben nodded. We don't want your pity. We want your respect. And if you cannot give that, then know this. Earth is no longer silent. And we remember every word you said." He stepped back. Elena stood beside him, her eyes steady. They did not ask for a vote. They did not demand a seat. They simply stood, present, undeniable. And for the first time in over a century, the galaxy saw Earth not as a backwater, but as something new, something awake, something that had been watching all along. The silence that followed Ben Carter's words was not pretty. It was thick with shock, doubt, and the slow turning of minds. In the Galactic Council chamber, no one moved for a long moment. Even Kalar sat frozen, his usual arrogance replaced by something unfamiliar, uncertainty. Zintra stared at the floor, her fingers still, her breathing shallow. The recordings had been real, not faked, not exaggerated. They were private words spoken in confidence, now laid bare before the entire galaxy. Ben did not gloat. He did not press further. He simply stood beside Captain Elena Ruiz, both of them calm, both of them waiting. They had said what needed to be said. Now it was up to the Council to decide what came next. But Earth had not come only with truth. They had come with an offer. Ben reached into his pocket and held up a small data crystal, no bigger than his thumb. It glowed faintly blue. "This contains everything we've learned about your systems over the last century," he said. "Not just your secrets, but your strengths, your energy grids, your trade routes, your hidden alliances, even the weaknesses in your defense networks." A ripple of alarm spread through the chamber. Several delegates leaned forward, eyes wide. One Helian officer reached for his sidearm, then stopped himself. "Why would you give us this?" asked the Mycelian delegate, her voice like wind through leaves. "Because knowledge should not be a weapon," Ben replied. "It should be a bridge. We could have used this to hurt you, to sabotage your ships or leak your plans. But we didn't. Instead, we offer it as proof that we understand your world as well as you do, and that we choose peace over revenge." Elena added, "We don't want to be your enemy. We want to be your equal." The words landed differently with each listener. Some saw generosity, others saw strategy. A few saw both. But none could deny the courage it took to walk into the lion's den and hand the lions a map of their own den. The Council called for a recess. Delegates filed out in hushed groups, speaking in low tones. In the corridors, arguments broke out. The Virex faction demanded Earth be expelled immediately. The Helian hegemony insisted the data crystal was a trap. But smaller species, the ones who had long been ignored or bullied by the major powers, began to whisper among themselves. They had heard Earth's story before. Not from broadcasts, but from their own histories. They knew what it felt like to be called primitive while their resources were taken. Back on the Odyssey, the rest of the crew waited. Communications Officer Dev Patel monitored every signal from the spire. Engineer Luis Garcia, yes, Rosa's father, checked the ship's systems for the 10th time, though everything was stable. They were ready for anything: arrest, attack, or acceptance. On Earth, billions held their breath. Screens in every city showed the empty council chamber, waiting for the session to resume. In Chicago, Rosa sat with her class, watching silently. In Nairobi, Maya Patel stood at attention in the command center, her eyes on the live feed. In Geneva, President Ford watched alone, his hands clasped, his face unreadable. When the council reconvened, the mood had shifted. Kalar did not return to his seat. He had been recalled by the Virex Dominion for unauthorized conduct. Zintra remained, but she did not speak. The Helian hegemony had already begun internal investigations into her private communications. The presiding chair, an ancient being from the Orlan Collective, rose slowly. His voice was deep, slow, and heavy with age. Earth has shown restraint where others would have struck. It has offered truth where others would have lied. And it has asked for nothing but a seat at the table. He turned to Ben and Elena. "You say you do not seek war. Do you seek membership?" Ben shook his head. "Not yet. We seek recognition. Not as a threat. Not as a child. But as a voice that has earned the right to speak." The Orlan delegate nodded. After a long pause, he announced a provisional resolution. Earth would be granted observer status with full voting rights on matters of ecology, ethics, and species rights. It was not full membership, but it was a start. More than that, it was respect. Then came the surprise. The Mycelian conquered the Qatari Swarm, and 3 other minor factions formally requested joint research initiatives with Earth. They wanted to learn about human biorestoration, AI ethics, and social cohesion, things the major powers had dismissed as soft sciences. As the session ended, Ben and Elena were escorted not to a detention cell but to guest quarters. That night, for the first time, humans slept aboard the Council Spire, not as prisoners but as guests. The next morning, Earth's data crystal was accepted. Council engineers verified its contents. It was real. More than that, it was accurate, down to the last decimal. Some of the information even helped them fix a flaw in their main power grid that had caused outages for months. Word spread fast. Earth wasn't just smart. Earth was useful. In the days that followed, Ben and Elena met with delegates one by one. They did not boast. They listened. They shared stories of Earth's recovery, the rewilding of the Amazon, the cleanup of the Pacific Gyre, the global ban on autonomous weapons. Many aliens were stunned. They had assumed humanity was still drowning in war and waste. Elena showed them footage of children planting trees in the Sahara. Ben played audio of a symphony performed in a restored coral reef. These were not weapons, but they were powerful. By the end of the week, the Council issued a formal apology, not for everything, but for the unfounded remarks and harmful proposals made against Sol 3. It was a small phrase, but it meant everything. Back on Earth, people did not celebrate with fireworks. They celebrated quietly. A teacher hugged her students. A farmer watered his crops with extra care. A poet wrote a new verse about stars that finally looked back. The galaxy had learned something important. Silence is not emptiness. Sometimes it is the space where strength grows, and Earth, once called irrelevant, had just changed the rules of the game, not with force, but with truth, patience, and the quiet courage to show up when it mattered most. The Odyssey turned toward home with the stars behind it and a new silence ahead. Not the silence of being ignored, but the silence of being understood. Inside the ship, the crew moved with quiet satisfaction. They had done what they set out to do. They had spoken. They had been heard, and the galaxy would never see Earth the same way again. Back on the Council Spire, changes unfolded slowly but surely. Kalar's name was scrubbed from official records. Zintra resigned under pressure, her political career in ruins. The proposal to harvest Earth's oceans was not just rejected, it was erased from the archives as if it had never existed. In its place, a new committee formed, the Sol 3 Partnership Initiative, co-led by the Mycelian Concord and Earth's own delegation. Its goal was not to take but to share clean water tech, atmospheric modeling, even joint deep space monitoring for rogue asteroids. Earth's observer status quickly proved more valuable than anyone expected. When a dispute broke out between two mining colonies over shared asteroid fields, it was Ben Carter who suggested a solution based on Earth's old river-sharing treaties. When a bioplague threatened a fragile moon colony, it was Luis Garcia who helped design a containment field using Earth's coral reef regeneration algorithms. The galaxy began to realize that human knowledge, though born from a single planet, held answers they had overlooked in their rush toward bigger engines and brighter weapons. On Earth, life returned to its rhythm, but with a new pride woven into the everyday. Children no longer flinched when alien ships passed overhead. They waved. In schools, lessons now included basic xenolinguistics and galactic civics. Rosa, Luis's daughter, started a club where kids built model starships and debated how to greet new species. She even wrote a letter to Captain Ruiz, asking what it felt like to stand in front of the whole galaxy. Ruiz wrote back, "It felt like coming home." Maya Patel was promoted to lead the newly public Orbital Defense Corps, now renamed the Earth Space Liaison Unit. Its mission was no longer secrecy, but cooperation. She trained pilots from a dozen nations, all preparing for joint patrols with Mycelian and Qatari vessels. The skies above Earth were no longer just protected, they were shared. President Ford gave a rare public address one evening, standing on a balcony in Geneva with the lights of the city below. He did not speak of victory. He spoke of responsibility. "We asked for respect," he said, "and we earned it. But respect is not a trophy. It is a promise. To stay honest, to stay humble, and to never forget why we waited so long to speak." The Odyssey's return was not marked by parades, but by a global moment of stillness. At noon Coordinated Earth time, every screen, every speaker, every public space went quiet for exactly 1 minute. not out of mourning but out of gratitude, for those who had listened, who had built, who had waited, and who had finally stepped forward so the rest of humanity could stand tall. When the ship docked in the Pacific Orbital Bay, Elena Ruiz was the last to step onto the platform. She looked out at the crowd, not a sea of faces but a tapestry of cultures, ages, and hopes. She saw Rosa waving from the front row, Maya standing at attention nearby, Luis holding a handmade sign that read, "Welcome home, Captain." Elena smiled. She had carried Earth's voice to the stars. Now she was home. In the months that followed, Earth's role in the galaxy grew, not through conquest but through connection. Human artists were invited to exhibit in the Xylos Cultural Spire. Earth's climate restoration models were adopted by 3 struggling colonies. Even the Virex Dominion, humbled and wary, sent a quiet request for help with soil regeneration on their desert worlds. Earth said yes. The Council never again referred to Sol 3 as a mud ball or gravity addict. New delegates were briefed on Earth's history, not just its wars, but its recoveries. Not just its mistakes, but its mends. The phrase, "Earth stayed silent," became a saying across the galaxy, used to describe patience that leads to power, or quiet strength that speaks louder than noise. Years later, when the first joint Earth Mycelium research station opened near Jupiter, a young girl from Nairobi, Maya's niece, became its youngest engineer. On her first day, she looked out the viewport at the swirling red storm below and whispered, "We made it." And she was right. Humanity had not won a war. It had won something harder, trust. Not by shouting the loudest, but by listening the longest. Not by proving they were the strongest, but by showing they were wise enough to wait. In classrooms and homes, in ships drifting between stars, the story was told again and again. How Earth stayed silent until the insults went too far. And how, when it finally spoke, the whole galaxy had to listen. The stars no longer looked down on Earth with pity or scorn. They looked with respect, because Earth had proven that silence is not weakness. It is the space where courage grows, where unity forms, and where a single voice, when it finally speaks, can change everything. And from that day on, no one in the galaxy ever dared to call Earth silent again.